Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1984 supernatural spectacular Ghostbusters. Now, this is one of those films that is very near and dear to my heart. I grew up watching it on VHS along with the second film. I watched them both countless times. I've easily seen this film at least 100 times, if not more than that. And I can also honestly say that it's one of those movies that I can watch over and over again and never get tired of it. It's a timeless classic film. It's as close to a perfect high concept comedy as you can get. And in a lot of ways, it was lightning in a bottle. As much as I do enjoy the sequel, and there were certain elements of some of the other Ghostbusters adaptations or properties that I can find some enjoyment out of, the first film is still hands down the best, the most consistent in terms of quality, and it has set a bar for the franchise and honestly for high concept comedy as a whole that very few films have ever even come remotely close to, even after all these years. That's because it was such a special, one of a kind mix of a certain cast at a certain point in time, a certain director, and it just all coalesced together into such a electric and dynamic film that rightfully became such an instant pop culture phenomenon upon its release. The film was number one in the box office for 7 weeks straight in 1984. That is really impressive, even when you compare it to today's standards when it comes to a box office take or box office domination, so to speak. And the film is widely considered to be a classic film today for a good reason, but I think a lot of people forget that this was considered to be an incredibly risky project. And there were a lot of studios that turned this film down. Dan Aykroyd originally envisioned this as a project for him and John Belushi, and his original vision for Ghostbusters was very different than what ultimately wound up on the screen. It was more technical. It was not really as condensed. It was a little bit more spread out. There's a lot of different things going on, too many things going on. It was considered to be an impossible script. And Harold Ramis came in and did some rewrites because you had to change things around because John Belushi had passed away. So you couldn't really tailor it as a vehicle for Belushi and Aykroyd anymore. You had to do something different with that. And Harold Ramis trimmed a lot of the things, a lot of the more extraneous details, and brought some more much needed focus to the script. And even then, it was turned down by one studio after another until Columbia decided to finally take a chance on it. And there are publications and there are quotes from other studio heads at the time that were laughing at Columbia and laughing at anyone that decided to take on this film and give it this big budget because they thought this was going to be a flop. They thought this was going to be one of the biggest fails of 1984. They did not see it as being one of the biggest hits of that year. They saw it as the opposite. And you can kind of understand why. It's a very weird, silly idea of these four regular guys who team up and create some technology and bust ghosts. And it's mostly played straight. Like, you can see why that's something that a lot of studios would look at and be like, what's the appeal for this? This is too out there for the average audience. But it just happened to be one of those things where you can call it fate, you can call it karma. The film was destined to be a success, and it was destined to be this hit with audiences. And the reason why it had that resonance in 1984, and the reason why it still has the same amount of resonance today, is because of all of these different elements that came together. You have Ivan Reitman, who was already a really talented and great director in his own right, and he was just a perfect guy to bring this film to fruition, to really take these ideas and these concepts and the cast and rein it all in. Ivan enabled his cast of really talented comedians who were really genuine masters of improvisation in their prime have fun with the concept and come up with their own lines and gags, but he did it in a controlled fashion. He didn't allow it to become straight up chaos like other linorama comedies today. He set things up where he would shoot things the way that he wanted, and if the cast was able to get a line in quick enough, then he would consider having that in the film. And a lot of the improv was kept in the film because it was just so hilarious and so witty and clever. But a lot of that is because of the fact that Ivan Reitman controlled the film. He controlled his cast. He made it so they were able to follow his lead instead of the cast being the ones that are in control of everything. And that's not an easy thing, especially with these really big magnetic personalities and Bill Murray and Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis and just trying to rein them all together. And visually, I've always felt that his direction in this film is impressive. There's a lot of really epic shots in this film when it comes to the action, when it is there with the proton packs and the ghosts, and the finale, which is genuinely spectacular with the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. And he also really found the right mix of serious and camp, which is not always an easy thing to do. This is a film that doesn't take itself too seriously, but at the same time, it takes things seriously enough where it feels like there are genuine stakes, and it feels like there is some actual reality to things, despite things being so over the top and crazy at certain points in the film. And I think that's a testament not only to the script, but also to Ivan's direction, because you just maintained the right tone throughout and the right amount of energy. He shot this film in a lot of ways like a controlled proton stream, like a blast of proton energy that was just directed and aimed perfectly. I almost want to use a quote from the film to sum up his direction. I think I will. Nice shooting, Tex. Now, the screenplay, in a lot of ways, it is a placeholder for the cast to have fun with the concept and really play in a pretty significant sandbox, but there's enough elements there where I think the script is still quite stellar in its own right by Dan Aykroyd and Harold Ramis. Because it's such a great setup. It's such a great sandbox for these talented cast members to play around in. And the reason why this script works so well, to me personally, and to a lot of other critics, is that it plays things straight. Not super straight, but straight enough that it feels like there's not really a lot of moments where it's trying to be bad or it's trying to be too silly. It feels very grounded. And there's a certain grit to the script too, and a certain reality and certain genuine dramatic elements that just make this film stand out when it comes to the storytelling. It doesn't really feel just like a run-of-the-mill comedy as a result, with funny actors doing funny things. Like, it actually feels like there's more to it. And that's a testament to the screenplay. It really is. They easily could have just been silly gags one after another and not really decided to take anything seriously at all. And it might have still been somewhat successful, but I don't think it would have had the same impact with that approach. Because I don't think that approach is as effective as a serious, straightforward approach with some moments of tongue-in-cheek humor, but also some moments of genuine horror and suspense. And I take issue with some people saying that the characters of Ray, Egon, and Venkman, and Winston were just a bunch of schlubs. A bunch of loser schlubs who just happen to save the world. I hate that interpretation of these characters. I think it is so far off the mark. It's unbelievable. I don't see Ray, Egon, Bankman, and Winston as schlubs. I don't see them as fat, schlubby losers. I think that's selling them way too short when it comes to how their characters are written. They're heroes. I'm sorry. They are heroes. They save the world, and they are relatable heroes. They're likable heroes because they're just normal guys. Even though you have Egon and Ray who are a little bit abnormal when it comes to their IQs or the way that they behave, but they still seem rather normal compared to other heroes on the big screen. So you can see yourself in their shoes, which is something that this film really does have going for it. Because there's a lot of things when it comes to films like Ghostbusters that would come out afterwards where they would just throw in a big cast and you'd have this over-the-top concept and this high concept idea, and you just have, hey, be funny, and that's their character. But that's not really the case with Ray, Winston, Egon, and Venkman. And even other characters like Dana Barrett and Louis Tully. Like, it actually felt like there was more to these characters. They had certain quirks, but they had certain layers to them. And they had certain personalities that really did stand out and were quite charming. The reason why these characters are still beloved to this day is in part due to the performances by the amazing cast, but it's also due to the screenplay and what these actors had to work with from the start. It's a really great framework. And I love how there were different in jokes, like Louis Tully, and how his character keeps getting locked out of his apartment, and how it even ties into when he eventually gets possessed by the terror dog at the end. And I like how the film just builds up and escalates. I like how there are consequences. I like how you have the whole thing with the EPA guy, Walter Peck, and how Venkman decides not to cooperate with him. Does the whole thing where you didn't use the magic word, and you go get a court order, and I'll sue your ass for wrongful prosecution. You can have it your way, Mr. Venkman. I love that scene because it just sets things up to where there are consequences for their actions. These heroes, these characters, the Ghostbusters, they're not infallible. They at times do make mistakes, and Venkman made a pretty big mistake there. Yeah, Walter Peck is an asshole, but kind of was in his right there. And Venkman could have handled the situation better, but he didn't, and then it just really started the wheels moving for the apocalypse and for the arrival of Gozer. I love how the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man comes into play because that's what popped in Ray's head. He thought the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man would never ever destroy mankind because he had such nostalgic, warm, fuzzy feelings for that character and that creation. And then it's brought to life in horrifying fashion, and it's a kaiju, and it's just rampaging and stomping through New York City. So there's a lot of things about this script that I just really like. I love the relationship that builds between Venkman and Dana, and I like how Winston is brought in. I would have liked to have seen more with Winston, but what you do get is still really strong, solid stuff. He's the everyman archetype. He's the regular average Joe, and he helps ground the film in a lot of different ways. That scene with him and Ray in the ectomobile talking about Judgment Day, that's one of the best scenes in the film. And it's really well acted by the two, but the dialogue there is also really strong. And it really does weigh on you. It's a sequence that a lot of people remember for good reason because it's a moment where the film kind of stops the zaniness and it really grounds itself. And it's like, this is some serious shit. Like, this really legitimately might be the end of the world. This is not all fun and games and uh, jokes and gaffs. Maybe we need to be taking this seriously. And then you have other stuff like the finale where they get permission from the mayor and they get a police escort with the National Guard at their side, and they're running some red lights, and they go up to the hotel, and they're about to go up there, but then they face some obstacles where the spirit causes an earthquake, and they manage to survive that. And it's a really great badass moment in film because of the way that it's set up within the narrative. And then it just leads to one of the funniest gags, one of the funniest moments in the movie, which is just a really great juxtaposition of serious, genuinely cool, badass heroics, and then they wind up doing the most anticlimactic thing imaginable. They're just walking up multiple flights of stairs, and they're doing it slowly, and they're laboring up the stairs. I love that bit. And it's just a prime example of why this film and its screenplay is just so amazing and so good, because it just has that timing down to a science. And you can't talk about the film without talking about the cast. I mean, Bill Murray, this is one of those roles that he was born to play. This wise ass, sarcastic, sardonic character in Peter Venkman. From the moment you first see him on the screen, messing with this poor guy with an electric shock machine, you know that you are in for a really good time, and this is a very special and awesome character because yeah, he's a wise ass, but he's likable. He's very lovable. You're drawn to this guy because he just has this electric, magnetic personality. You can see why a lot of people want to associate themselves with him, or they get drawn in by him, and they do ultimately fall for his wiles. Dan Aykroyd, in a lot of ways, just like Venkman says at some point in this film, he is the heart of the Ghostbusters. He's the heart of the team. He's this guy who, in a lot of ways, is very naive, and he's endearingly uh, daft at times. He's not always thinking things through. Like he's very emotional, but he's really an endearing character. Like you really do love Ray because he's just a guy who loves being a Ghostbuster and just loves life, and it's something that really does uh, stand out. And it's a prime element of why this cast works so well. I mean, the whole scene in the firehouse where he's just he's so enthusiastic about the firehouse and wants to stay there and sleep there and is just going down the fire pole and just having the time of his life. He does have this childlike glee about things, and it's very infectious. Sigourney Weaver is Dana Barrett. She's in a lot of ways definitely intended to be more the love interest for the film and not really much more than that. But she still manages to make the character her own, and there are a lot of moments between her and the other Ghostbusters, specifically Venkman, where she really does hold her own comedically with her own bits of line delivery. And she had a lot of fun with the whole bits where she's possessed by Zool, and it didn't seem like she was holding back in any way when it comes to that kind of take on her character. It's something that you easily could have seen happen with a actor or actress that is more known for doing a lot of serious dramatic roles, and they're just not able to really pull that off. But she did. She was a total professional and a total babe. Harold Ramis as Egon. I mean, I miss Harold so much, and he was just a really great straight man to Venkman and Ray and their personalities. Um, it was a performance that was just a tour de force, an absolute clinic on how you can take a character that is very dry and very serious and straightforward and make the character into something that is the antithesis of boring and forgettable. Like he's a very memorable character because of Harold Ramis's take on the role and the character overall. I mean, it's a very solid performance. I mean, it is easily one of his best, if not his best performance when it comes to his acting career. I know at one point Eddie Murphy was going to be Winston, or they wanted him to be Winston, but he had to make a choice between Ghostbusters or Beverly Hills Cop, and I think he made the right choice in the end. As much as I would have loved to have seen Eddie Murphy work alongside Bill Murray, Dan Aykroyd, and Harold Ramis, I am perfectly happy and fine with the way things turned out because Beverly Hills Cop was just a better project for Eddie. and it was the better vehicle for him to catapult himself into stardom than this film, because he would have to share a lot of screen time and it would be kind of hard for him to really uh, stand out when it comes to this cast. And it enabled Ernie Hudson to come in and make a name for himself as Winston. You could just see the inherent talent with Ernie when it comes to his scenes in this film. He makes the best he possibly can with honestly a lot of minor scenes. Very little. He's not really in the film a lot, and he still manages to make enough of an impact that you remember him, that he leaves his mark. And the rest of the supporting cast also are excellent. I mean, Rick Moranis as Louis Tully. He was just perfectly cast as this character. And I know at one point John Candy was supposed to be this character, but he wanted to do something that was a little bit too out of the box and weird. I think it was something like German schnauzers or something, and Harold and Dan were like, no, that's just too much. That's too weird. And they decided to go in a different direction. I think that was the better choice, because as much as I love John Candy, I don't know why he wanted to do that. Like if he just played the role like Rick Moranis did, it was just a nerdy guy, then I think it would have worked. But this weird thing with German schnauzers, I don't know what the fuck he was thinking there. Uh, Annie Potts, another performance that makes the best out of not a lot of screen time. And she honestly is probably the most memorable receptionist character in all of cinema, if you really think about it. William Atherton, just a perfect prick. Like he's always been great at these kind of roles, and this film is no exception. This is arguably the film that really did set him up as the guy that you want to cast to play the biggest asshole on planet Earth. And he's just a good foil for the Ghostbusters, specifically Venkman. The scene with him, Venkman, he's trying to get him to show him the basement, and Venkman's like, no, you didn't use a magic word. There's a lot of great tension with those two, and then you have the bits near the end where they're at the mayor's office, and this explosion is the direct cause of it. Uh, yeah, well, everything was fine until Dickless over here shut off the power grid. Yes, it's true. This man is no dick. And then he gets carried away by the mayor. It's like, get him out of here. I'm gonna miss him. I'm gonna send him a nice fruit basket. Just a great foil. Um, and you have some other roles too that leave their mark. David Margulies as the mayor. Um, you have Slavitsa Jovan as Gozer, very striking look for the visual appearance of the Sumerian god Gozer. And you even have like Reginald Vell Johnson from Die Hard and Family Matters plays a police officer in this film. You have Jennifer Runyon as the girl who Venkman is hitting on in the start of the movie. Alice Drummond as the librarian. Cameos from Roger Grimsby, Larry King, Joe Franklin, Casey Kasem. And it all adds up to a wonderful cast and one of the best of the entire decade, if not of all time. Like, it's a really top flight, top notch cast. And then you have some really impressive cinematography by Laszlo Kovacs. I love how the film looks very gritty and grimy. It has a certain New York look to it, which fits it so perfectly. Like it's every bit as industrial and grimy as the jumpsuits that the Ghostbusters wear after they've been wearing them for days and they're caked in slime. And I just really like the look of the film. I've always loved the look of this movie. It has a certain grit to it that I think really does help it have a more real and powerful and striking balance of imagery because everything's just not too clean and sharp. Like there's some jagged moments of the cinematography that I think actually do benefit the film. And it is a film that I've always thought looked really good. And I felt that Ivan and Laszlo were on the same page. The film also features some really solid editing by David E. Blewett and Sheldon Kahn. No pun intended. David did not blow it with the editing, and neither did Sheldon. They all really had the film maintain the same kind of focus and overall flow that Ivan and the cast were going for. Scenes didn't feel like they drug on too long. You didn't have jokes that felt like they were just dying on the screen. And a big part of that has to do with the editing, as also the talent of the cast. I mean, that's one thing that a lot of people have mentioned when it comes to this movie is that it has these moments where the cast are playing off the concept and they're just riffing, but the riffs never really feel like they're too forced or they're shoehorned in. They feel natural. And on top of that, they don't go on forever in a fucking day. So Ivan knew when to cut them off, or they knew when the joke was at its highest point. They had an idea of timing, as well as chemistry. And that's something you can't really teach. And that is, in a lot of ways, another element of this film's ultimate success that I think a lot of people take for granted as well. The chemistry of this cast. That's not always something that works. It's not always something that pans out to take these really talented, funny comedians and put them in one movie and then their personalities all mesh together seamlessly. But that's what happened with Ghostbusters. And that's another reason why it's lightning in a bottle. It's not the kind of electric nuclear reaction that you can recreate that often. And then, speaking of electric, speaking of things that really do sizzle on the screen, you've got the special effects by Richard Edlund and companies. Really incredible visuals. The terror dogs. I love the creativity of the different ghosts and their different forms. Slimer is just one of them. I've always felt there was a certain sinister edge to these ghosts that made them stand out from a lot of other ghost films at the time. The librarian ghost to the cab driver ghost. The cab driver ghost used to scare the shit out of me as a kid. Like I'd always like turn away from that scene because it was creepy, and it still is because it's just a zombie. It's just a rotting corpse who's driving a cab. Maybe it's not that creative with the rotting corpse, but it's at least ballsy. And that's something that I really do appreciate about the film, how ballsy the film is when it comes to the visuals, when it comes to the ghosts, when it comes to the jokes, when it comes to the edge. This film has a definite edge to it. I mean, there's lines of dialogue that as a kid I never got, but as an adult I get, and it just makes the film even funnier. This guy's in New York, he's a sailor, we get this guy laid and we'll have no problem. And just moments of just pure badassery. Like the line from Venkman, let's show this prehistoric bitch how we do things downtown. Like, that's the kind of stuff you might not really think would be at home in a silly, over the top comedy. But it works. And it feels like it's a genuine badass moment. It doesn't feel like it's forced. Oh, one more thing. I want to talk about the film's art direction. Specifically, the design of the proton packs and the ghost trap and the jumpsuits and the Ecto 1, because those were really terrific in their own right. Some absolutely just stupendous designs that really did showcase the talent of the artists that were at work with this film. You bought that these were bits of technology that were built out of spare parts. They were very, I'm trying to think of the right word. They were not cookie cutter. They were jumbled and chaotic and messy and very industrial. And I just love the design. It just is such a memorable series of set pieces. And then on top of that, you have the Ecto 1 and the Ghost logo, the No Ghost logo, which was created by, I think, one of the guys who worked for Coca-Cola. And it was an instant eye grabber. Like, you see the No Ghost logo, it's simple, but just really good and just burns its way into your memory. It's a prime example of how sometimes simple is actually better than a more complicated bit of advertising. And just having that on the Ectomobile, the hearse, and just a different paint job, and then the added bits of the other bits of jumbled technology that are on top of it, plus the really memorable siren, just led to one of the most iconic cars in cinema history. So there's just so many things about this film that are just on a high level. And it's just another instance upon instance, or element upon element, that just show how special this film really is. And then you have the score, the spectacular, wonderful score by Elmer Bernstein, that in a lot of ways is the spirit of this film. It really is a quirky mix of serious horror compositions as well as comedic notes, and it just fits so well, and it elevates the film to even higher heights. And you can't talk about the music without talking about the soundtrack. I mean, the iconic song Ghostbusters by Ray Parker Jr. Yeah, I know there are some notes that are similar to Huey Lewis, and he was asked to do a Huey Lewis kind of song, and that's why it sounds almost identical to one of Huey's songs. But Huey had the chance to do the soundtrack and he turned it down. So it's one of those things where I don't feel bad for Huey Lewis, and that's the reason why Huey Lewis did Back to the Future. He probably never would have done Back to the Future if he didn't turn down Ghostbusters. So there's a silver lining to that as well. And I've never really felt that that song and I Want a New Drug really sounded that similar anyway. I mean, if you break down the compositions and you look at the notes, okay. But if you play them side by side, they really don't sound that similar. And that being said, it's still a rollicking, fun tune. And the rest of the soundtrack's really good too. Magic by Mick Smiley, Hot Night by Laura Branigan, and then my personal favorite song from the original motion picture soundtrack, Saving the Day by the Alessi Brothers. I've always loved that song ever since I heard it during the scene where the Ghostbusters get their proton packs back and are getting ready to fight Gozer, and they go up to the street and they deal with the supernatural poltergeist kind of happenings where the ghosts are causing the earthquake, and the guitar riff and just the overall setup and composition of the song, it just works so well. And it's just, I've always really loved that song. And it's a film that is just immensely enjoyable and entertaining because this cast is just so wonderful. They have this nuclear chemistry with one another. The writing is very strong. The story is simple but effective. You sympathize with and root for these guys to make this ghost busting business into something that's successful, because you genuinely do want the best for them. And that's why I never really saw them as losers, because they're winners to me. They're likable guys. You can relate to them. They A lot of them are really intelligent and smart. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't think losers get PhDs. And I don't see Winston as a loser either. He's a guy, yeah, he'll do anything you say if there's a steady paycheck in it. But that speaks to a lot of people. There's a lot of people who would do the same thing. Yeah, I'll believe anything you say as long as you give me a steady paycheck. And they're just characters that are just instantly iconic. And it's just one of those movies that I could talk about for hours. As you can see, I'm almost already to 40 minutes, and I was originally intending to do this video because I didn't want it to be too long, but here we are. But it's just one of those things where this film is just right. There's just so many things about it that click. And it's one of those movies, like I said many times in this video, and like I will say one more time, it was lightning in a bottle. You're just not going to recapture that same energy and that same mix of different elements ever again. But that one time that they did it, I mean, wow. Like, what a spectacular result. Anyway, thanks for watching my review of Ghostbusters. And as always, I'll see you later. See ya.